March 6, 1944, 28,000 feet above Berlin, Germany. Hauptmann Klaus Weber pressed his oxygen mask tighter against his face as his Messerschmitt Bf 109 G6 climbed through the freezing air toward the massive formation of American B-17 flying fortresses approaching the German capital. What he was about to witness would shatter every assumption German fighter pilots held about American bomber vulnerability and trigger a crisis of confidence that would echo through Luftwaffe squadrons for the remainder of the war. Weber had shot down 47 Allied aircraft during 3 years of combat operations, including 23 heavy bombers. He understood the weak points of American bomber designs, the precise attack angles that could cripple their engines, and the exact positions where concentrated cannon fire could break their formations. His Focke-Wulf 190 squadron mates called him the Fortress Killer for his methodical destruction of B-17s and B-24s over German-occupied Europe. Today would be different. Today, Weber would encounter a single B-17G flying fortress that would absorb punishment beyond anything he had believed possible and continue flying with damage that should have destroyed any aircraft ever built. The bomber, serial number 42-31367, and named Hell's Angels by its American crew, would become legendary among German pilots as proof that American industrial engineering had achieved capabilities that German aviation could not match or understand. The morning briefing at Luftwaffe headquarters near Brandenburg had been routine. Intelligence officers reported 814 American B-17 and B-24 bombers approaching German airspace, accompanied by over 900 escort fighters, including the dreaded P-51 Mustangs that had been systematically destroying German interceptor forces. German fighter controllers had positioned 400 aircraft along the bomber route, including their newest cannon-armed variants specifically designed to destroy heavy bombers with concentrated firepower. Weber led his staffel of 12 Messerschmitt 109s in a climbing intercept, their aircraft loaded with additional 20mm cannon ammunition and equipped with the latest armor-piercing rounds designed to penetrate American bomber defensive systems. His pilots had trained extensively in coordinated attack, patterns that maximized their firepower against individual bombers while minimizing exposure to defensive fire from the closely packed formations. The initial sighting shocked even experienced pilots like Weber. The American bomber stream stretched across the sky for miles, their formations maintaining precise spacing and altitude despite intense flak from German anti-aircraft batteries below. Each four-engine fortress bristled with 50-caliber machine guns in positions that provided overlapping fields of fire against attacking fighters. Weber selected his target carefully, identifying a B-17G flying in the low squadron of the lead group. The aircraft appeared identical to dozens of flying fortresses he had successfully destroyed, showing no external modifications or unusual characteristics that would suggest enhanced defensive capabilities. His tactical plan followed proven German doctrine: approach from ahead and slightly above. Concentrate fire on the cockpit and forward bomb bay, then break away before the bomber's defensive gunners could respond effectively. The attack began perfectly. Weber rolled into his diving attack with his wingman, Oberleutnant Franz Stigler, maintaining formation beside him as they approached the bomber formation at closing speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour. Their combined firepower, 6 20mm cannons and 4 13mm machine guns, could destroy any bomber with a single accurate burst delivered to critical areas. Weber opened fire at 400 meters range, his cannon shells walking across the B-17's nose section and left wing route. He watched his armor-piercing rounds impact the bomber's aluminum skin, seeing flashes of hits that should have ignited fuel tanks or severed critical control systems. Stigler's simultaneous attack targeted the same aircraft from a slightly different angle, adding his firepower to the concentrated assault. The B-17 shuddered under the impact of cannon shells, but maintained formation position and altitude. Weber pulled up from his attack run, expecting to see the bomber trailing fire or falling out of formation as its crew struggled with catastrophic damage. Instead, Hell's Angels continued flying straight and level, its engines running smoothly and its defensive gunners returning accurate fire that forced Weber to take evasive action. Impossible, Weber transmitted to his wingman. We achieved multiple hits on critical areas. That bomber should be destroyed, or at least severely damaged. Stigler's response captured the disbelief spreading through German fighter units. I saw our shells impact the cockpit area and left wing. The aircraft should not be controllable with that level of damage. Though German pilots had just encountered their first example of American engineering, excellence that would redefine their understanding of bomber survivability. The B-17G Flying Fortress incorporated design, features, and manufacturing quality that German intelligence had underestimated and German industry could not match during wartime production conditions. Weber reformed his flight for a second attack, this time approaching from the bomber's vulnerable belly position where defensive fire was limited. His tactical manual specified this approach as highly effective against flying fortresses, allowing concentrated fire against fuel tanks and bomb bay areas that were difficult to armor adequately. The second attack delivered even more concentrated firepower as 4 Messerschmitt 109s simultaneously engaged the same B-17 from converging angles. Weber watched his cannon shells impact the bomber's fuselage and right wing, counting hits that should have caused catastrophic structural failure or fuel system destruction. Hell's Angels absorbed the punishment without apparent effect on its flight characteristics or formation position. The bomber's crew continued their mission profile, maintaining precise altitude and heading toward their target in Berlin while their defensive gunners engaged attacking fighters with accuracy that forced German pilots to break off their attacks earlier than tactical doctrine recommended. For Weber, a veteran pilot with extensive combat experience against Allied bombers, the encounter represented his first glimpse of American industrial capabilities that exceeded every assumption German aviation had made about enemy equipment vulnerability and design limitations. The third coordinated attack against Hell's Angels involved 8 German fighters converging simultaneously from multiple directions, delivering concentrated firepower that exceeded anything Weber had previously employed against a single bomber. The tactical coordination represented the pinnacle of German fighter doctrine, with each pilot assigned specific target areas to maximize cumulative damage while preventing mutual interference during the attack sequence. Weber led the primary attack element, approaching from the bomber's 10 o'clock position with his cannon armed with the latest armor-piercing ammunition specifically designed to penetrate American bomber protection systems. Oberleutnant Heinrich Müller attacked from 2 o'clock, targeting the starboard engines and wing root fuel tanks. Feldwebel Otto Kraus and his wingmen engaged from below, directing their fire at the bomb bay and fuselage fuel cells that intelligence reports identified as critical vulnerability points. The converging attack delivered devastating firepower that should have destroyed any aircraft ever built. Weber counted his cannon strikes across the bomber's nose section, left wing, and forward fuselage, watching armor-piercing shells penetrate the aluminum skin at points that should have caused immediate catastrophic failure. The combined German firepower represented over 200 rounds of 20mm cannon ammunition and 400 rounds of 13 machine gun fire, concentrated on a single target during a coordinated attack lasting 18 seconds. Hell's Angels staggered under the impact of concentrated cannon fire, but maintained formation, integrity, and continued toward its target. Weber watched in growing disbelief as the B-17 absorbed punishment that had destroyed dozens of bombers during his previous combat encounters. The aircraft's engines continued running smoothly, despite multiple hits on engine nacelles and cowlings. Its control surfaces remained responsive, despite visible damage to wing structures and tail surfaces. Staff Sergeant Robert Johnson, the B-17's tail gunner, returned accurate defensive fire that forced Weber to break off his attack earlier than planned. The American gunner's .50 caliber machine gun rounds passed uncomfortably close to Weber's cockpit, demonstrating gunnery training and defensive coordination that German intelligence had consistently underestimated in their assessments of American bomber crew capabilities. Weber's wingman, Stigler, transmitted his growing frustration with the tactical situation. "That bomber has absorbed more punishment than entire formations we've engaged successfully. Either our ammunition is defective or American engineering has achieved capabilities we don't understand." The German pilots were encountering their first comprehensive demonstration of American manufacturing quality and design philosophy that prioritized survivability over theoretical performance optimization. Software B-17G incorporated redundant systems, structural reinforcement, and damage tolerance that German bombers had never achieved despite superior individual component specifications. Major Hans Philipp, commanding the interceptor group from his Focke-Wulf 190, observed the engagement while coordinating additional attack elements. Philipp's combat experience included 206 confirmed victories against Allied aircraft, making him one of Germany's most successful fighter pilots and a tactical authority whose assessments carried significant weight within Luftwaffe circles. "Continue attacking that bomber," Philipp transmitted to his subordinate squadrons. "We must determine the extent of American defensive improvements and develop countermeasures for future operations." Philipp's tactical decision to concentrate multiple squadrons against a single bomber reflected growing German concerns about American bomber survivability improvements that were making traditional attack methods increasingly ineffective. Intelligence reports suggested systematic enhancements to American bomber designs, but the extent of these improvements had not been fully understood until combat encounters like this one. The fourth coordinated attack involved 12 German fighters executing simultaneous runs from 6 different directions, creating crossfire patterns that should have overwhelmed any bomber's defensive capabilities, while delivering concentrated destruction against critical aircraft systems. Weber led his element in a head-on attack that had proven consistently effective against previous B-17 formations. The German attack plan called for precise timing that would coordinate all attacking fighters to engage the target simultaneously, preventing the bomber's defensive gunners from concentrating their fire against individual attackers, while maximizing cumulative damage from converging cannon fire. The tactical complexity required extensive training and perfect coordination between pilots with different aircraft performance characteristics. Weber opened fire at maximum effective range, walking his cannon strikes across the bomber's nose, section and cockpit area where concentrated hits should have eliminated the aircraft's crew and flight control capability. His armor-piercing ammunition, specifically designed to penetrate American bomber protection systems, should have caused immediate catastrophic damage to critical aircraft systems. The coordinated attack delivered over 400 rounds of 20mm cannon fire and 800 rounds of 13mm PT machine gun ammunition against the single B-17 during a 20-second engagement that represented the most concentrated firepower German fighters could deliver against an individual target. The cumulative impact should have reduced any bomber to burning wreckage, falling toward the German countryside below. Hell's Angels absorbed the concentrated firepower with damage that would have destroyed any German bomber design, but continued, flying in formation with its engines maintaining power and its defensive armament continuing to engage attacking fighters. Weber counted multiple hits on critical areas including cockpit, engines, wing structures, and fuselage sections. Yet the bomber showed no signs of the catastrophic failure that such damage should have caused. Technical Sergeant William Harrison, the B-17's flight engineer, managed engine systems that continued operating despite visible damage to cowlings and accessory sections. His training in American bomber maintenance and emergency procedures allowed continued operation of aircraft systems that German engineers would have considered impossible to maintain after sustaining such extensive battle damage. The bomber's structural integrity remained adequate for continued flight operations, despite cannon damage that had penetrated wing spars, fuselage frames, and control surface mounting points. American manufacturing quality and design margins had created an aircraft that could absorb battle damage exceeding anything German combat experience had encountered during 3 years of bomber interception operations. Weber reformed his remaining aircraft for another attack approach, but his ammunition supply was nearly exhausted after 4 concentrated engagement sequences. The tactical situation that German doctrine assumed would result in rapid bomber destruction had evolved into extended combat that favored the Americans' superior defensive firepower and aircraft survivability. For German fighter pilots trained to expect quick bomber kills through concentrated cannon fire, the encounter with Hell's Angels represented their first comprehensive demonstration of American industrial capabilities that exceeded every assumption their tactical training had incorporated. The ammunition shortage that Weber faced represented more than tactical inconvenience. It revealed fundamental flaws in German interceptor doctrine that had been designed around the assumption that American bombers could be destroyed quickly through concentrated firepower. German fighters carried limited ammunition loads optimized for brief, decisive engagements, rather than extended combat against bombers that could absorb unprecedented levels of battle damage. Weber's Messerschmitt 109 G6 carried 150 rounds for its centerline 20mm cannon and 300 rounds for each of its 2 13mm machine guns, a total firepower loadout that German tactical planners calculated as sufficient to destroy 3 to 4 enemy bombers during typical engagement sequences. The assumption that individual bombers would succumb to relatively limited cannon fire had proven catastrophically wrong against American aircraft, whose survivability exceeded German expectations by enormous margins. Oberst Hannes Trautloft, commanding the day fighter forces from his headquarters bunker, monitored radio communications that revealed growing tactical confusion among his pilots. Trautloft's operational experience included successful campaigns against Polish, French, and British air forces, making him one of Germany's most knowledgeable fighter commanders and a strategic authority whose assessments influenced Luftwaffe operational planning. American bomber survivability has exceeded our intelligence estimates by significant margins, Trautloft transmitted to his subordinate group commanders. Pilots are reporting sustained resistance from bombers that should have been destroyed during initial attack sequences. We require immediate tactical revision to address these defensive improvements. Trautloft's acknowledgement that German tactical doctrine required fundamental revision represented a strategic admission that German aviation leadership had been reluctant to make. American bombers were no longer the vulnerable targets that German intelligence assessments had described, requiring new attack methods that German fighters might not be capable of executing effectively. Major Georg Peter Eder, leading the 2nd JG-26 in Focke-Wulf 190s, equipped with additional cannon armament, attempted a different tactical approach against Hell's Angels using concentrated firepower from his squadron's 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns per aircraft. Eder's tactical plan called for sequential attacks that would maintain continuous pressure on the bomber while allowing individual pilots to conserve ammunition for extended engagement. Eder's first attack run targeted the bomber's right wing and engine nacelles, delivering concentrated cannon fire that should have ignited fuel tanks or severed critical control cables. His armor-piercing ammunition, manufactured using Germany's highest quality steel and explosive compounds, represented the most effective anti-bomber ordnance that German industry could produce during wartime conditions. The attack achieved multiple hits on critical aircraft systems without producing the catastrophic results that German tactical doctrine predicted. Hell's Angels shuddered under the impact of 20mm cannon shells, but maintained formation position and engine power settings that suggested minimal degradation in aircraft performance despite visible battle damage. Staff Sergeant Charles Thompson, the B-17's top turret gunner, engaged Eder's attacking Focke-Wulf with twin 50-caliber machine guns that demonstrated accuracy and sustained fire discipline exceeding anything German pilots had encountered from American bomber defensive systems. Thompson's gunnery training reflected systematic American programs that produced consistent defensive capabilities across all bomber crew positions. Eder broke off his attack under accurate defensive fire that damaged his aircraft's engine cowling and forced him to reduce power settings to prevent overheating. The tactical situation had reversed from traditional German advantages to American defensive superiority that made bomber interception increasingly hazardous for attacking fighters. That bomber's defensive armament is more accurate and better coordinated than our intelligence reports indicated, Eder transmitted to his squadron. American gunner training has improved significantly since our last major bomber encounters. Eder's assessment highlighted another dimension of American improvements that German intelligence had underestimated. American bomber crews received extensive gunnery training using standardized procedures and unlimited ammunition supplies that German resource constraints made impossible to replicate in their own defensive program. The systematic improvement in American bomber crew training reflected industrial advantages that extended beyond aircraft manufacturing to encompass personnel development programs. American bomber crews completed comprehensive training courses that included hundreds of hours of gunnery practice against realistic targets, while German bomber crews received minimal defensive training due to fuel shortages and ammunition conservation requirements. Hauptmann Walter Nowotny, one of Germany's leading aces with 258 confirmed victories, observed the extended engagement while leading his own squadron toward the bomber formation. Nowotny's combat experience included successful encounters with every Allied aircraft type, making his tactical assessments particularly valuable for German operational planning. American bomber survivability represents systematic engineering improvements rather than isolated design changes, Nowotny reported to Sector Command. These aircraft possess damage tolerance that exceeds anything we've encountered during previous operations. Our current attack methods require immediate revision to achieve acceptable loss ratios. Nowotny's professional evaluation, based on extensive combat experience against Allied aircraft, confirmed that American bombers had achieved survivability, levels that German tactical doctrine could not counter effectively using existing attack methods and aircraft capabilities. The fifth coordinated attack against Hell's Angels involved 16 German fighters executing simultaneous runs from 8 different directions, representing the maximum firepower concentration that German tactical doctrine could achieve against a single target. Weber led one attack element despite his critically low ammunition supply, determined to contribute to the systematic destruction of a bomber that had absorbed more punishment than any aircraft in his combat experience. The massive coordinated attack delivered concentrated firepower exceeding 600 rounds of 20 mm cannon ammunition and 100 rounds of 13 mm machine gun fire during a 30-second engagement that should have completely destroyed any aircraft ever built. The tactical coordination required precise timing and exceptional pilot skill to prevent mutual interference while maximizing cumulative damage against critical target areas. Hell's Angels staggered under the concentrated assault, but continued, flying in formation with engine power maintained and defensive armament continuing to engage attacking fighters. Weber watched his final cannon rounds impact the bomber's fuselage and wing structures, achieving hits that should have caused immediate structural failure or fuel system destruction. The B-17's continued survival, after absorbing such concentrated punishment, represented a paradigm shift in aerial warfare that German fighter pilots found impossible to comprehend using their existing understanding of aircraft vulnerability and damage tolerance. The psychological impact on German pilots became evident as radio communications shifted from confident tactical coordination to expressions of disbelief and growing demoralization. Lieutenant Friedrich Oblesser, a veteran pilot with 120 confirmed victories, transmitted a situation report that captured the crisis spreading through German fighter units. This bomber has absorbed more direct hits than entire formations we've destroyed successfully. Either our weapons are ineffective, or American engineering has achieved capabilities beyond our understanding. Oblasser's assessment reflected observations that German aviation leadership found increasingly difficult to dismiss. Individual German pilots, squadrons, and entire fighter groups were reporting encounters with American bombers whose survivability exceeded every tactical assumption that German interceptor doctrine had incorporated during 3 years of operational development. The technical specifications that Hell's Angels demonstrated under combat conditions contradicted German intelligence estimates about American bomber construction and vulnerability. The B-17G's structural design incorporated redundant load, paths, self-sealing fuel tanks, and damage-tolerant systems that German bombers had never achieved, despite theoretical engineering knowledge that should have enabled similar capabilities. Weber's ammunition exhaustion forced him to observe subsequent attacks without participating, providing perspective on German tactical limitations that extended beyond individual pilot capabilities to encompass fundamental aircraft and weapons design problems. German fighters carried limited ammunition loads that assumed quick bomber kills, while American bombers possessed survivability that made extended engagements necessary for successful interception. Major Hartmann Grasser, commanding the 33 for JG-54, attempted a new tactical approach using rocket-armed Messerschmitt 109s equipped with underwing R-4M rockets designed to destroy bomber formations through concentrated explosive power. His tactical plan called for standoff attacks that would deliver devastating firepower without exposing German fighters to American defensive gunnery. Grasser's rocket attack achieved multiple hits on Hell's Angels with explosive warheads that should have caused catastrophic structural failure or fuel system destruction. Weber watched the rocket impacts create visible damage to wing structures and fuselage sections, expecting to see the bomber break apart or fall out of formation as its airframe succumbed to explosive damage. The B-17 absorbed rocket impacts that would have destroyed any German bomber design, but continued flying with minimal apparent degradation in performance or flight characteristics. The aircraft's structural integrity remained adequate for continued operation, despite damage that German engineering calculations suggested should have caused immediate catastrophic failure. Technical Sergeant Robert Martinez, the B-17's radio, operator, and waist gunner, managed communications systems that continued operating despite battle damage that had severed primary electrical cables and damaged radio equipment mounting points. His training in American bomber maintenance procedures allowed improvised repairs and system bypasses that kept critical equipment functional under combat conditions. The bomber's electrical systems incorporated redundant power distribution and backup generators that German bombers lacked due to weight and complexity constraints that German designers had prioritized over survivability considerations. American engineers had accepted additional weight and manufacturing complexity to achieve operational reliability that proved decisive during extended combat encounters. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, commanding JG-77 and observing the engagement from high altitude, provided tactical assessment that German aviation leadership could no longer ignore. American bomber survivability represents systematic engineering advantages that our current interception methods cannot overcome. We face opponents whose industrial capabilities have achieved defensive improvements that render our tactical doctrine obsolete. Steinhoff's professional evaluation, based on extensive combat experience and tactical authority within German fighter aviation, represented acknowledgement that American bombers had evolved beyond German interceptor capabilities using existing aircraft and attack methods. The sixth major attack against Hell's Angels involved 24 German fighters from 3 different squadrons executing coordinated runs that represented the maximum tactical concentration possible under operational conditions. The attack plan required complex coordination between pilots flying different aircraft types with varying performance characteristics and weapons loadouts. Hauptmann Anton Haeckel, leading the Focke-Wulf 190 element, targeted the bomber's engines and wing root fuel tanks using concentrated 20 mm cannon fire designed to achieve immediate catastrophic destruction through fuel system ignition or engine failure. His tactical approach had proven consistently effective against previous American bomber formations. The coordinated attack delivered over 800 rounds of 20 mm cannon fire and 1,600 rounds of 13 mm machine gun ammunition during a 40-second engagement that should have completely annihilated any aircraft structure. The cumulative firepower exceeded anything German tactical doctrine had considered necessary for bomber destruction, representing maximum effort that German fighter units could sustain under operational conditions. Hell's Angels absorbed the WWII concentrated assault with damage that penetrated critical aircraft systems but failed to achieve the catastrophic destruction that such firepower should have produced. The bomber's engines continued operating despite multiple hits on nacelles and accessory systems. Its flight control systems remained responsive despite visible damage to control surface actuators and cable runs. Staff Sergeant James Mitchell, the B-17's ball turret gunner, continued engaging attacking fighters with twin 50-caliber machine guns that maintained accuracy despite battle damage that had affected turret rotation mechanisms and ammunition feed systems. His gunnery effectiveness forced German pilots to break off attacks earlier than tactical doctrine recommended. The American defensive gunnery demonstrated training standards and equipment reliability that German bomber crews had never achieved, despite theoretical knowledge and tactical instruction that should have enabled comparable capabilities. American gunners received extensive training with unlimited ammunition supplies, while German crews faced severe practice restrictions due to resource shortages. Weber observed the tactical situation with growing recognition that German fighter aviation faced opponents whose capabilities exceeded every assumption that German operational planning had incorporated. American bombers possessed survivability that made traditional German attack methods ineffective, while American defensive gunnery achieved accuracy that made bomber interception increasingly hazardous for attacking fighters. The industrial implications were becoming clear as Weber calculated ammunition expenditure versus damage achieved. German fighters had expended over 1,400 rounds of 20 mm cannon ammunition and 2,400 rounds of machine gun ammunition against a single bomber without achieving destruction that German tactical doctrine predicted should require less than 200 rounds of concentrated fire. The ammunition consumption rates that American bomber survivability demanded exceeded German production capacity and logistical systems' ability to supply fighter units with adequate ordnance for sustained operations. German fighter effectiveness was being systematically reduced by American defensive improvements that made bomber interception economically unsustainable. The ammunition crisis spreading through German fighter units represented more than tactical inconvenience. It revealed fundamental miscalculations in German strategic planning that had underestimated American industrial capabilities and overestimated German interceptor effectiveness. Weber watched his squadron mates break off attacks not due to enemy defensive fire, but because their weapons were completely exhausted against a single bomber that continued flying toward its target. General Major Adolf Galland, General of Fighters for the Luftwaffe, received preliminary battle reports at his headquarters that painted a disturbing picture of ammunition consumption rates exceeding sustainable levels. Galland's operational authority encompassed all German fighter operations, making his assessment of combat effectiveness critical for strategic planning and resource allocation decisions. Ammunition expenditure against American bomber formations has increased by 400% compared to previous operational averages, Galland reported to his superiors. Individual bombers are absorbing firepower that previously sufficed to destroy entire formations. Our logistical systems cannot sustain these consumption rates while maintaining adequate fighter unit strength. Galland's assessment highlighted strategic vulnerabilities that German military leadership had been reluctant to acknowledge. American bomber survivability improvements were systematically degrading German interceptor effectiveness while imposing unsustainable logistical demands on ammunition production and distribution systems already strained by wartime conditions. The industrial mathematics were becoming undeniable as Weber calculated the implications of extended combat against bombers whose survivability exceeded German tactical assumptions. If single bombers required the concentrated firepower of entire squadrons for successful destruction, German fighter units would exhaust their ammunition supplies against individual targets, while bomber formations continued toward their objective. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Rosenthal, piloting Hell's Angels from the left seat, managed flight controls that continued responding despite battle damage that had severed primary control cables and damaged hydraulic actuator systems. His training in American bomber emergency procedures allowed continued aircraft operation using backup systems and manual control inputs that maintained formation position and flight path accuracy. Rosenthal's crew demonstrated systematic training and equipment familiarity that enabled continued mission execution despite battle damage that would have forced German bomber crews to abandon their aircraft or abort their missions. American bomber crew training emphasized emergency procedures and damage control that German programs had never developed comprehensively. The B-17's flight control systems incorporated redundant actuators, backup cable runs, and manual reversion capabilities that German bombers lacked due to weight and complexity considerations that German designers had prioritized over operational survivability. American engineers had accepted additional manufacturing complexity to achieve damage tolerance that proved decisive during extended combat encounters. Major Heinz Baer, commanding the 2nd JG-1 with 220 confirmed victories, attempted a different tactical approach using diving attacks from high altitude that would deliver maximum kinetic energy to armor-piercing ammunition. His tactical innovation represented adaptation to American defensive improvements that had rendered traditional attack methods increasingly ineffective. Baer's diving attack achieved exceptional velocity and impact energy that should have enabled his ammunition to penetrate any aircraft structure or protection system. His 20mm cannon shells struck Hell's Angels at velocities exceeding 800 meters per second, delivering kinetic energy that German ballistics calculations suggested would cause catastrophic damage to critical aircraft systems. The high-velocity impacts created visible damage to wing structures and fuselage sections, but failed to achieve the penetration and destruction that German ballistics theory predicted. American aircraft construction incorporated materials and manufacturing techniques that provided protection exceeding German theoretical calculations based on conventional aluminum alloy specifications. Staff Sergeant Donald Thompson, the B-17 CVVT engineer and top turret gunner, maintained engine power settings that compensated for battle damage affecting fuel flow and ignition systems. His technical training in American bomber power plant operation allowed continued engine operation despite damage that German maintenance procedures would have considered impossible to overcome during flight operation. The American bombers' Wright R-1820 Cyclone engines continued delivering rated power despite multiple cannon hits on engine nacelles, accessory drives, and cooling system. The engines incorporated design margins and manufacturing quality that enabled continued operation under battle damage conditions that would have caused German engines to fail catastrophically. Weber observed the 7th major coordinated attack against Hell's Angels as 16 fresh German fighters from JG-2 engaged the bomber with full ammunition loads and systematic tactical coordination. The attacking pilots had monitored previous engagement sequences and developed modified attack patterns designed to exploit any vulnerabilities that earlier attacks had revealed. Hauptmann Siegfried Schnell, leading the fresh attack element, coordinated simultaneous runs from converging directions that should have overwhelmed the bomber's defensive capabilities while delivering concentrated destruction against critical aircraft systems. His tactical plan incorporated lessons learned from previous attacks that had achieved hits without corresponding damage effects. The coordinated attack delivered over 500 rounds of 20mm cannon fire during a perfectly executed engagement sequence. that achieved multiple hits on engines, fuel systems, and structural components. Weber counted impacts that should have caused immediate fuel ignition, engine failure, or structural collapse based on German combat experience against previous American bomber types. Hell's Angels absorbed the concentrated firepower with continued flight performance that defied German understanding of aircraft damage tolerance and system redundancy. The bomber's engines maintained power despite hits on critical components. Its fuel systems continued operating despite impacts on tank areas and fuel lines. Its structure remained intact despite damage to primary load-bearing members. The American bomber crew continued their defensive gunnery with accuracy that forced German attackers to break off their runs earlier than tactical doctrine recommended. The coordinated defensive fire from multiple gun positions created crossfire patterns that made sustained attacks increasingly hazardous for German fighters, whose pilots were already demoralized by their weapons' apparent ineffectiveness. Oberst Hannes Trautloft, monitoring the extended engagement from his command bunker, reached conclusions that German fighter aviation leadership could no longer avoid. American bomber survivability has reached levels that our current tactical methods cannot overcome effectively. We face opponents whose engineering capabilities exceed our weapons' effectiveness by margins that make successful interception problematic. Trautloft's assessment represented professional acknowledgement that German fighter aviation faced technological disadvantages that extended beyond individual aircraft performance to encompass fundamental design philosophy differences between American and German approaches to bomber construction and survivability. The cumulative ammunition expenditure against a single bomber had reached levels that German logistics systems considered unsustainable for operational units required to engage entire bomber formations rather than individual aircraft. The tactical situation deteriorating around Hell's Angels represented more than individual combat engagement. It demonstrated systematic American advantages that were reshaping the fundamental mathematics of aerial warfare over Europe. Weber calculated that German fighter units had expended enough ammunition to destroy 12 bombers using pre-war tactical assumptions, yet a single B-17 continued flying toward Berlin with its mission profile intact and its defensive armament fully operational. Oberst Dietrich Hrabach, commanding JG-52 and one of Germany's most experienced fighter leaders with over 400 combat missions, transmitted an assessment that captured the strategic implications of what German pilots were witnessing. American bomber construction has evolved beyond our interceptor capabilities. Individual aircraft are absorbing concentrated firepower that previously sufficed to destroy entire formations. Our tactical doctrine requires fundamental revision, or we will exhaust our ammunition supplies without achieving mission objective. Hrabach's evaluation carried enormous weight within German fighter aviation due to his extensive combat experience and tactical authority. His conclusion that German interceptor methods were fundamentally inadequate against current American bomber capabilities represented acknowledgement that German aviation faced opponents whose industrial development had exceeded German military planning assumptions. The ammunition shortage that had eliminated Weber's ability to contribute to further attacks spread through the entire German interceptor force, as squadron after squadron reported complete expenditure of their ordnance loads against the single bomber. German pilots who had trained to expect decisive results from concentrated cannon fire found themselves reduced to observer status while their target continued toward its objective. Captain Eugene Vance, Hell's Angels bombardier, prepared for the bombing run over Berlin using Norden bombsight equipment that continued operating accurately despite battle damage that had affected electrical systems and mounting stability. His training in American precision bombing techniques enabled target acquisition and bomb release coordination that maintained mission effectiveness despite extensive aircraft damage. The American bomber's mission execution capability under battle, damage conditions demonstrated systematic crew training and equipment design that German bomber aviation had never achieved. German bomber crews typically aborted missions when aircraft sustained damage levels far below what Hell's Angels had absorbed while continuing toward its target with full operational capability. Major Werner Mölders Jr., son of the legendary German ace and commanding 2, JG-51, observed the engagement while leading his own squadron toward the American bomber formation. His tactical assessment reflected growing recognition among German pilots that American aircraft capabilities had evolved beyond German interceptor effectiveness. The Americans have achieved aircraft survivability that our weapons cannot overcome using conventional attack methods, Mölders reported. This bomber has absorbed direct hits from over 40 fighters without losing formation position or mission capability. We require new tactical approaches or enhanced weapons systems to achieve acceptable interception rates. Mölders' professional evaluation, informed by his father's legendary combat experience and his own extensive operations against Allied aircraft, confirmed that German fighter aviation faced systematic disadvantages that could not be overcome through pilot skill or tactical innovation alone. The eighth major coordinated attack against Hell's Angels involved German fighters from 4 different squadrons executing simultaneous runs that represented the maximum tactical effort possible under operational conditions. The attacking pilots had studied previous engagement sequences and developed modified approaches designed to achieve concentrated impact on specific aircraft systems. Hauptmann Gerhard Schöpfel, leading 3JG-26 in the coordinated assault, targeted the bomber's control surfaces and tail structure using concentrated cannon fire designed to sever flight control systems and eliminate the aircraft's maneuverability. His tactical focus on control system destruction had proven effective against previous American bomber encounters. The coordinated attack achieved multiple hits on tail surfaces, elevator controls, and rudder systems that should have eliminated the bomber's flight control capability and forced immediate emergency landing or crew bailout. German pilots watched their cannon shells impact critical control areas with precision that should have rendered the aircraft uncontrollable. Hell's Angels maintained formation position and flight path accuracy despite control surface damage. The German aerodynamic calculations suggested should have caused immediate loss of control authority. The bomber's flight control systems incorporated redundancy and manual backup capabilities that allowed continued operation despite damage to primary control actuators and cable systems. Staff Sergeant Richard Henderson, the B-17's waist gunner, continued engaging attacking fighters with 50 caliber machine guns despite wounds sustained during previous attack sequences. His determination to maintain defensive fire effectiveness reflected American crew training that emphasized mission continuation despite personal casualties and aircraft damage. The American defensive gunnery maintained accuracy that forced German attackers to limit their engagement time and break off attacks before achieving optimal firing solutions. The coordinated defensive fire from multiple crew positions created interlocking fields of fire that made sustained attacks increasingly hazardous for German fighters. Weber observed tactical coordination between American bomber crews that exceeded anything German bomber aviation had achieved during operational training or combat missions. The defensive gunners communicated target information and coordinated their fire patterns to maximize effectiveness against attacking fighters while minimizing interference between gun positions. The industrial implications of American bomber survivability became clear as Weber calculated the resource expenditure required to achieve successful interception under current conditions. German ammunition production capacity could not sustain the consumption rates that American bomber survivability demanded while maintaining adequate supplies for fighter units engaged against entire bomber formations. German fighter effectiveness was being systematically degraded by American defensive improvements that made bomber interception economically unsustainable using existing weapons and tactical methods. The strategic balance of aerial warfare was shifting decisively toward American advantages that German industrial capacity could not match or counter effectively. General Lieutenant Werner Junk, commanding the 2nd Jagdkorps and responsible for home defense operations, received combat reports that confirmed his worst strategic fears about American bomber development. Junk's operational authority encompassed fighter defense of German industrial targets, making his assessment of interceptor effectiveness critical for strategic planning. American bomber survivability has reached levels that threaten the viability of our current defense strategy, Junk reported to Luftwaffe High Command. Individual bombers are requiring the concentrated attention of entire fighter squadrons without guaranteeing successful destruction. Our interceptor force cannot sustain these engagement ratios while defending against massed bomber formations. Junk's strategic assessment highlighted the systematic failure of German air defense planning that had assumed American bombers would remain vulnerable to concentrated fighter attack using conventional weapons and tactics. The strategic ramifications of Hell's Angels' survival became clear as German ground controllers calculated the tactical mathematics that were reshaping aerial warfare over Europe. A single American bomber had consumed the attention and ammunition of over 60 German fighters for more than 20 minutes without being destroyed, while the remainder of the 814 bomber formation continued toward their targets with minimal interference from German interceptor forces. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, commanding the Luftwaffe from his headquarters near Berlin, received preliminary reports that confirmed his growing fears about American industrial capabilities exceeding German defensive planning assumptions. Göring's strategic authority encompassed all German air operations, making his assessment of combat effectiveness decisive for resource allocation and operational planning decisions. American bomber construction has achieved survivability levels that our current interception methods cannot overcome efficiently, Göring reported to Hitler's military staff. Individual bombers are absorbing firepower that previously sufficed to destroy entire formations while continuing their missions with minimal degradation in operational capability. Our fighter force faces systematic disadvantages that threaten the viability of home defense operations. Göring's acknowledgement that German air defense faced fundamental inadequacies represented strategic admission that German aviation leadership had been reluctant to make. American bombers were no longer the vulnerable targets that German tactical doctrine had assumed, requiring new approaches that German technology and resources might not be capable of developing effectively. The 9th coordinated attack against Hell's Angels involved fresh fighter units from JG-11 equipped with specialized bomber-destroyer variants carrying heavy cannon and rocket armament designed to achieve catastrophic damage through concentrated explosive power. Major Günther Speck, commanding the attacking formation, had developed tactics specifically for destroying resilient American bombers through overwhelming firepower concentration. Speck's tactical approach employed Messerschmitt 109s equipped with underwing 30mm cannon that fired high-explosive shells designed to destroy bomber structures through blast effect rather than penetration damage. His attack plan called for simultaneous engagement by 8 fighters, delivering concentrated explosive power that should have eliminated any aircraft regardless of structural design or damage tolerance. The coordinated rocket and cannon attack achieved multiple hits with high-explosive ordnance that created visible blast damage to wing structures, fuselage sections, and engine nacelles. Weber watched the explosive impacts expecting to see catastrophic structural failure or fuel system ignition that would finally destroy the bomber that had absorbed unprecedented punishment. Hell's Angels staggered under the explosive impacts but maintained structural integrity and flight performance that defied German understanding of blast damage effects on aircraft systems. The bomber's construction incorporated damage-tolerant design features that allowed continued operation despite explosive damage that should have caused immediate catastrophic failure. Lieutenant Robert Williams, the B-17's co-pilot, managed engine controls that compensated for blast damage affecting fuel metering and ignition systems. His training in American bomber emergency procedures enabled continued power plant operation, using backup systems and manual overrides that maintained adequate thrust for formation flying and mission continuation. The American bomber's Wright Cyclone engines demonstrated reliability under battle-damage conditions that German engines could never match. The power plants incorporated design margins and manufacturing quality that enabled continued operation, despite explosive damage to accessory systems, fuel delivery components, and cooling installation. Hauptmann Egon Meyer, inventor of the head-on attack technique against American bombers and commanding 3 JG-2, attempted his signature tactical approach using concentrated firepower delivered during high-speed frontal passes. His method had proven devastatingly effective against previous B-17 formations, achieving rapid bomber destruction through precise targeting of cockpit and forward fuselage areas. Meyer's head-on attack delivered concentrated 20 mm cannon fire at point-blank range, achieving hits on the bomber's nose section, cockpit area, and forward bomb bay that should have eliminated crew members and critical flight systems. His tactical execution was flawless, representing the pinnacle of German fighter pilot skill and tactical development. The frontal attack achieved multiple hits on critical areas without producing the catastrophic crew casualties and system failures that Meyer's technique typically caused. Hell's Angels absorbed the concentrated frontal assault with continued crew effectiveness and flight system operation that German tactical experience suggested should have been impossible after such precise targeting. Staff Sergeant George Martinez, the B-17's navigator, continued providing navigation guidance despite wounds and equipment damage sustained during the frontal attack. His determination to maintain mission effectiveness reflected American crew training that emphasized continued operation despite casualties and equipment failures. The American bomber crew demonstrated casualty management and damage control procedures that enabled continued mission execution despite personnel losses and equipment failures that would have forced German bomber crews to abort their missions. American training programs emphasized emergency procedures and crew coordination that German aviation had never developed systematically. Weber observed the tactical situation with growing recognition that German fighter aviation faced opponents whose capabilities extended beyond aircraft survivability to encompass crew training, equipment redundancy, and operational procedures that maximized mission completion probability under adverse conditions. The cumulative effect of American advantages in aircraft construction, crew training, and equipment design created compound superiority that German tactical innovations could not overcome using existing fighter aircraft and weapons systems. German pilots faced opponents whose systematic approach to bomber operations had achieved decisive advantages across all aspects of combat effectiveness. Oberst Walter Oisau, commanding JG-1 and one of Germany's most experienced fighter leaders, with 123 confirmed victories, provided tactical assessment that German aviation leadership could no longer dismiss. American bomber operations represent integrated systematic development that exceeds our interceptor capabilities. Their aircraft survivability, crew training, and equipment reliability create advantages we cannot counter using current methods and resources. Oisau's professional evaluation, based on extensive combat experience against Allied aircraft across multiple theaters, confirmed that German fighter aviation faced systematic disadvantages that required fundamental revision of tactical doctrine, weapons development, and strategic planning priorities. The 10th Major Coordinated Attack against Hell's Angels represented the final effort by German fighters whose ammunition supplies were nearly exhausted after extended combat against a single bomber. 20 fighters from multiple squadrons executed simultaneous runs using their remaining ordnance in a desperate attempt to achieve the destruction that had eluded previous attack sequences. The final coordinated assault delivered concentrated firepower from every available German fighter in the engagement area, representing maximum tactical effort that German operational doctrine could sustain against individual targets. The attacking pilots achieved multiple hits on all aircraft systems and structural areas using the last of their ammunition supplies. The final coordinated assault against Hell's Angels represented the complete expenditure of German tactical resources against a single bomber that continued flying toward Berlin with mission capability intact despite absorbing more concentrated firepower than entire American bomber formations had faced during previous operations. Weber watched the last German cannon shells impact the B-17 structure while calculating the strategic implications of what he had witnessed. Major Adolf Galland Jr., observing the engagement from high altitude while leading his own squadron toward the American bomber stream, transmitted an assessment that captured the crisis spreading through German fighter aviation. This individual bomber has consumed the ammunition supplies of an entire fighter wing without being destroyed. If American bomber survivability has reached these levels systematically, our current interception capabilities are inadequate for effective home defense operations. Galland's evaluation reflected tactical reality that German aviation leadership could no longer ignore or rationalize away. Individual American bombers were absorbing concentrated firepower that German tactical doctrine had calculated as sufficient to destroy multiple aircraft while continuing their missions with minimal degradation in operational effectiveness. The ammunition exhaustion that had eliminated German offensive capability against Hell's Angels spread through the entire interceptor force as squadron commanders reported complete expenditure of their ordnance loads without achieving decisive results. German pilots, trained to expect rapid bomber destruction through concentrated cannon fire, found themselves reduced to helpless observers while their targets continued toward strategic objectives. Captain Charles Bishop, Hell's Angels pilot, maintained formation position and flight path accuracy despite battle damage that had affected primary flight controls, hydraulic systems, and engine management equipment. His training in American bomber emergency procedures enabled continued aircraft operation using backup systems and manual control inputs that preserved mission effectiveness under extreme combat conditions. The American bombers' continued mission execution capability demonstrated systematic crew training and aircraft design integration that German bomber aviation had never achieved despite theoretical knowledge and individual component capabilities that should have enabled comparable operational effectiveness. Technical Sergeant Frank Sullivan, the B-17's radio operator, maintained communications with the bomber formation and ground control stations using equipment that continued operating despite battle damage that had severed primary electrical cables and damaged antenna installations. His technical expertise in American bomber communication systems enabled improvised repairs and signal routing that preserved command coordination throughout the extended combat encounter. The American bombers' communications reliability under battle damage conditions reflected manufacturing quality and design redundancy that German aircraft had never incorporated due to weight and complexity constraints that German engineers had prioritized over operational survivability considerations. Hauptmann Heinrich Baer, one of Germany's leading aces with 220 confirmed victories, attempted a final attack using the last of his ammunition in a diving assault designed to achieve maximum impact velocity and penetration energy. His tactical expertise, developed through extensive combat experience against Allied aircraft, represented the pinnacle of German fighter pilot capability and tactical knowledge. Baer's final attack achieved hits on critical aircraft systems using armor-piercing ammunition delivered at maximum kinetic energy, creating impacts that should have penetrated any aircraft structure or protection system. His tactical execution was flawless, demonstrating individual pilot skill that had made German fighter aviation legendary throughout the early war period. The high-velocity impacts created visible damage to structural components and system installations, but failed to achieve the penetration and destruction that German ballistics calculations predicted should result from such precisely delivered attacks. American aircraft construction incorporated materials and manufacturing techniques that provided protection exceeding German theoretical estimates based on conventional engineering assumptions. Staff Sergeant William Rodriguez, the B-17's ball turret gunner, continued engaging German fighters with twin 50-caliber machine guns despite turret damage that had affected rotation mechanisms and ammunition feed systems. His gunnery effectiveness under adverse conditions reflected American training programs that emphasized defensive operations during equipment failures and battle damage situations. The American defensive gunnery maintained accuracy that forced German attackers to limit their engagement sequences and break off attacks before achieving optimal firing solutions. The systematic defensive training that American bomber crews received produced consistent tactical effectiveness that German improvised defensive programs had never matched. Weber observed the final phase of the engagement with recognition that German fighter aviation had been systematically outclassed by American opponents, whose capabilities exceeded every assumption that German tactical doctrine had incorporated. The single bomber had absorbed concentrated firepower from over 70 German fighters without being destroyed while continuing its mission toward strategic targets in Berlin. The strategic implications were devastating for German air defense planning. If individual American bombers possessed survivability that required the concentrated attention of entire fighter wings for successful destruction, German interceptor forces could not engage massed bomber formations effectively while maintaining adequate tactical reserves for continued defensive operations. General Major Josef Schmid, commanding Luftwaffe Reich and responsible for home defense operations, received combat reports that confirmed systematic failure of German interception capabilities against American bomber formations equipped with improved survivability features. Schmid's operational authority encompassed fighter defense of German industrial capacity, making his assessment critical for strategic resource allocation decisions. American bomber survivability has reached levels that threaten the fundamental viability of our air defense strategy, Schmid reported to Luftwaffe High Command. Individual bombers are requiring tactical attention that previously sufficed for engaging entire formations while continuing their missions with minimal operational degradation. Our interceptor effectiveness has been systematically neutralized by American engineering improvements. Schmid's strategic assessment represented acknowledgement that German air defense faced technological disadvantages that could not be overcome through tactical innovation, pilot training improvements, or operational modifications using existing aircraft and weapon systems. The industrial comparison that Weber calculated revealed American advantages that extended beyond individual aircraft capabilities to encompass systematic manufacturing quality, design philosophy, and resource allocation priorities that German wartime production could not match or counter effectively during sustained operations. American aircraft construction incorporated damage tolerance, system redundancy, and manufacturing quality that enabled continued operation under battle conditions that would have destroyed German aircraft design. The B-17's survival after absorbing unprecedented firepower concentration demonstrated American industrial maturity that German engineering had never achieved despite theoretical knowledge and scientific expertise. The fuel consumption, ammunition expenditure, and pilot fatigue that German fighters had accumulated during the extended engagement against a single bomber represented resource utilization rates that German logistics systems could not sustain. While defending against massed American bomber formations, attacking multiple strategic targets simultaneously. The strategic bombing mission continued toward Berlin as Hell's Angels maintained formation position with the bomber stream, despite battle damage that had eliminated several German fighter squadrons from further combat operations. Weber watched the B-17 fly steadily toward its target, while German interceptor forces, depleted of ammunition and demoralized by their ineffectiveness, were forced to withdraw from engagement with the bomber formation they had been assigned to destroy. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, commanding JG-77 and observing the tactical situation from his command aircraft, provided assessment that German fighter aviation leadership could no longer avoid confronting. American bomber construction has evolved beyond our interceptor capabilities using conventional weapons and attack methods. Individual aircraft are demonstrating survivability that exceeds our ammunition supplies and pilot endurance while maintaining full operational effectiveness. Steinhoff's professional evaluation informed by extensive combat experience and tactical. Authority within German fighter aviation confirmed that German air defense faced systematic inadequacies that threatened the viability of home defense operations against American strategic bombing campaigns. The crew of Hell's Angels demonstrated operational effectiveness under battle damage conditions that German bomber aviation had never achieved, despite comparable individual crew training and aircraft component capabilities. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Rosenthal, commanding the bomber from the pilot's seat, managed flight systems that continued operating despite damage that German maintenance procedures would have considered impossible to overcome during flight operations. Staff Sergeant Anthony Ricci, the B-17's flight engineer, monitored engine parameters and managed fuel system operation despite battle damage that had affected primary control panels and gauge installations. His technical expertise in American bomber power plant operation enabled continued engine management using backup instruments and manual control procedures that maintained adequate performance for mission completion. The American bomber's Wright R-1820 Cyclone engines delivered consistent power output despite multiple cannon hits on engine nacelles, accessory drives, and cooling system components. The engines incorporated design margins and manufacturing quality that allowed continued operation under damage conditions that would have caused German power plants to fail catastrophically during flight operations. Major Werner Schroer, commanding der Sekkudu, Aver Chow Joji 27, with 114 confirmed victories, attempted formation attacks using his remaining fighters in coordinated runs designed to overwhelm the bomber's defensive capabilities through numerical superiority and tactical concentration. His attack method had proven effective against previous American bomber formations that had suffered systematic destruction when engaged by coordinated German fighter tactics. Schroer's formation attack achieved coordinated engagement by 12 fighters delivering simultaneous firepower from converging directions, representing maximum tactical effort that German fighter doctrine could sustain against individual bombers. The attacking pilots executed flawless coordination that maximized cumulative damage while minimizing exposure to defensive fire. The coordinated attack delivered concentrated firepower against critical aircraft systems without achieving the catastrophic destruction that German tactical doctrine predicted should result from such precisely executed engagement sequences. Hell's Angels absorbed the coordinated assault with continued flight performance that defied German understanding of aircraft damage, tolerance, and system redundancy. Captain Eugene Vance, the B-17's bombardier, prepared for target approach over Berlin using navigation and bombing equipment that continued operating accurately despite battle damage that had affected electrical systems, instrument mounting stability, and optical alignment. His training in American precision bombing procedures enabled target acquisition and bomb release coordination under combat conditions that would have forced German bomber crews to abort their missions. The American bomber's Norden bomb sight and associated navigation equipment demonstrated reliability under battle damage conditions that German comparable systems had never achieved. The precision bombing capability that American bombers maintained despite extensive combat damage represented technological and training advantages that German bomber aviation had never developed systematically. Weber observed the bomber formation, approaching Berlin with recognition that German air defense had failed to prevent American strategic bombing operations despite concentrated effort by the most experienced fighter pilots flying the most advanced German aircraft available for interceptor operations. Individual American bombers possessed survivability that exceeded German tactical capabilities while maintaining mission effectiveness that ensured successful target engagement. The psychological impact on German fighter pilots became evident as radio communications revealed demoralization and tactical confusion among squadrons that had expected to achieve rapid bomber destruction through methods that had proven effective during previous operations. German pilots who had accumulated extensive combat experience against Allied aircraft found themselves helpless against opponents whose capabilities exceeded every tactical assumption their training had incorporated. Hauptmann Günther Roll, one of Germany's highest-scoring aces, with 275 confirmed victories, transmitted situation reports that captured the crisis spreading through German fighter aviation. American bomber survivability represents systematic engineering improvements that our current weapons and tactics cannot overcome. We have expended maximum tactical effort against individual bombers without achieving destruction, while bomber formations continue toward their objectives with minimal operational interference. Roll's assessment, based on exceptional combat, experience, and tactical expertise, confirmed that German fighter aviation faced opponents whose industrial development had achieved decisive advantages that German military capabilities could not counter using existing aircraft, weapons, and tactical methods. The ammunition shortage that had eliminated German offensive capability spread through interceptor units across the entire defensive sector as squadron commanders reported complete expenditure of their ordnance loads without achieving proportional destruction of American bomber formation. German logistics systems had never anticipated ammunition consumption rates that American bomber survivability demanded for successful interception operations. The strategic bombing of Berlin proceeded with minimal interference from German fighter defenses that had been systematically neutralized by individual bomber survivability exceeding German interceptor effectiveness. American bombers continued toward their targets with formation integrity maintained and bombing accuracy preserved despite concentrated defensive efforts by Germany's most capable fighter units. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, observing the tactical situation from Luftwaffe headquarters, reached conclusions that German aviation leadership could no longer avoid acknowledging. American bomber operations have achieved systematic superiority that neutralizes our interceptor effectiveness regardless of pilot skill, aircraft performance, or tactical innovation. We face opponents whose industrial capabilities exceed our defensive planning assumptions by margins that threaten the viability of continued resistance. Galland's strategic assessment represented definitive acknowledgement that German air defense faced technological and industrial disadvantages that could not be overcome through existing capabilities or realistic improvements in German aviation development programs. The bombing run over Berlin commenced as Hell's Angels approached its target, with the Norden bomb site operating at full precision despite battle damage that would have eliminated bombing capability in any German aircraft. Weber watched from his powerless Messerschmitt 109 as the bomber he had failed to destroy prepared to deliver its ordnance load against strategic targets in the German capital, with accuracy that would validate American strategic bombing doctrine. Captain Eugene Vance, manning the bombardier position, acquired target reference points through optical equipment that maintained alignment and clarity despite explosive damage that had affected mounting systems and protective glass installations. His training in American precision bombing techniques enabled target identification and tracking under combat conditions that German bombardier training had never addressed comprehensively. The American bombing accuracy achieved under battle damage conditions demonstrated systematic crew training and equipment design integration that German bomber aviation had attempted but never mastered during operational development programs. German bombardiers required optimal equipment conditions and minimal battle damage to achieve comparable accuracy levels that American crews maintained routinely under adverse circumstances. Staff Sergeant Robert Chen, the B-17's navigator, provided final course corrections using navigation equipment that continued operating despite damage to antenna systems, compass installations, and radio direction finding apparatus. His expertise in American bomber navigation procedures enabled precise target approach using backup systems and dead reckoning techniques that maintained bombing accuracy despite equipment degradation. The systematic navigation training that American bomber crews received produced consistent operational effectiveness that German navigation programs had never achieved despite comparable individual navigator capabilities and theoretical knowledge. American crews demonstrated procedural standardization and equipment familiarity that enabled mission completion under conditions that would have forced German crews to abort their operation. Major Hartmann Grasser, commanding 3rd JG-54 and observing the bombing approach with his ammunition-depleted fighters, transmitted tactical assessment that captured German fighter aviation's complete tactical failure. American bomber formations are achieving successful target engagement despite maximum defensive effort by our most experienced units. Individual bombers have demonstrated survivability that exceeds our interceptor capabilities, while maintaining precision bombing accuracy that validates their strategic objectives. Grasser's professional evaluation confirmed that German air defense had failed to prevent American strategic bombing operations despite concentrated effort by elite fighter units employing advanced aircraft and proven tactical methods. American bomber capabilities had evolved beyond German defensive planning assumptions by margins that threatened the viability of continued industrial resistance. The bomb release sequence over Berlin proceeded with precision that demonstrated American bombardier training and equipment reliability exceeding German strategic bombing capabilities. Hell's Angels delivered its ordnance load against designated targets with accuracy that would contribute to systematic degradation of German war production capacity while proving American industrial superiority in both defensive and offensive aviation operations. Technical Sergeant James Walsh, the B-17's radio operator, maintained communications with bomber formation leaders and ground control stations using equipment that functioned reliably despite battle damage that had severed primary electrical systems and damaged antenna installations. His technical expertise enabled continued command coordination throughout the bombing run and subsequent withdrawal from German airspace. The American bombers' communications reliability under extreme battle damage reflected manufacturing quality and design redundancy that German aircraft had never incorporated due to resource constraints and engineering priorities that emphasized performance over survivability considerations. American communications equipment demonstrated operational effectiveness that German comparable systems could not match under adverse conditions. Weber observed the bombing of Berlin with recognition that German air defense had been systematically defeated by American opponents whose capabilities exceeded every tactical assumption German fighter doctrine had incorporated. The strategic bombing mission would succeed despite maximum defensive effort by Germany's most experienced fighter units flying advanced aircraft with proven combat effectiveness against previous Allied operations. The industrial implications of American bomber survivability became undeniable as Weber calculated resource expenditure versus operational results achieved during the extended engagement. German fighter units had consumed ammunition supplies sufficient for engaging multiple bomber formations while achieving negligible impact on American bombing accuracy or mission completion rates. The ammunition consumption rates that American bomber survivability demanded exceeded German production capacity and logistical distribution systems' ability to supply fighter units with adequate ordnance for sustained defensive operations. German interceptor effectiveness was being systematically degraded by American defensive improvements that made bomber interception economically unsustainable using existing weapons and tactical methods. Oberst Dietrich Hrabach, commanding JG-52 and monitoring radio communications from the extended engagement, provided strategic assessment that German aviation leadership could no longer dismiss. American bomber operations represent integrated industrial development that exceeds our defensive capabilities across all operational categories. Their aircraft survivability, crew training, equipment reliability, and mission execution procedures create compound advantages that neutralize our interceptor effectiveness regardless of tactical innovation or resource allocation. Hrabach's feinfühlige, comprehensive evaluation based on extensive operational experience and tactical authority within German fighter aviation confirmed that German air defense faced systematic inadequacies that threatened the fundamental viability of continued resistance against American strategic bombing campaigns. The withdrawal phase of the bombing mission began as American bomber formations turned away from Berlin toward their return route to England. Hell's Angels maintained formation position and flight performance, despite battle damage that had eliminated several German fighter squadrons from further combat operations, while demonstrating continued operational capability that validated American bomber design philosophy and crew training programs. Captain Charles Bishop, piloting the damaged B-17 through the initial phase of the return flight, managed flight controls that responded adequately despite damage to primary control systems, hydraulic actuators, and structural components. His KQ training in American bomber emergency procedures enabled continued aircraft operation using backup systems and manual control inputs that preserved flight safety throughout the withdrawal from German airspace. The American bomber crew demonstrated damage control and emergency management procedures that enabled continued mission execution despite casualties and equipment failures that would have forced German bomber crews to abandon their aircraft or attempt emergency landings in hostile territory. American training programs emphasized mission completion and crew survival techniques that German aviation had never developed systematically. The strategic success of the Berlin bombing mission, despite maximum German defensive effort, represented decisive validation of American strategic bombing doctrine and industrial capabilities that German military leadership could no longer rationalize or counter effectively using existing resources and tactical methods. The return flight toward England provided Weber with time to analyze the devastating implications of what he had witnessed for German air defense strategy and fighter aviation effectiveness. His detailed mental notes, later compiled into intelligence, reports that would reach Luftwaffe High Command, documented American bomber capabilities that exceeded every assumption German tactical doctrine had incorporated during 3 years of interceptor development and operational refinement. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, receiving preliminary combat reports at his headquarters bunker, faced statistical evidence that German fighter aviation had suffered systematic tactical defeat, despite employing maximum available resources against American bomber formations. Göring's strategic authority encompassed all German air operations, making his assessment of interceptor effectiveness decisive for future defensive planning and resource allocation priorities. Individual American bombers are demonstrating survivability that neutralizes our interceptor capabilities regardless of pilot skill, aircraft performance, or tactical coordination. Göring reported to Hitler's military staff, "Our fighter units have expended ammunition supplies sufficient for destroying multiple bomber formations against single aircraft that continue their missions with minimal operational degradation. American industrial development has achieved advantages we cannot counter using existing capabilities." Göring's acknowledgement that German air defense faced insurmountable technological disadvantages represented strategic admission that German aviation leadership had avoided making despite accumulating evidence of American superiority across all aspects of bomber operations and defensive systems integration. The fuel consumption, ammunition expenditure, and pilot fatigue that German fighter units had accumulated during the extended engagement against Hell's Angels represented resource utilization rates that German logistics systems could not sustain. While defending against massed American bomber formations, attacking multiple strategic targets simultaneously across German-occupied Europe. Staff Sergeant Michael O'Brien, the B-17's tail gunner, maintained defensive coverage during the withdrawal flight using 50 caliber machine guns that continued operating reliably despite battle damage that had affected ammunition feed mechanisms and gun mounting systems. His gunnery effectiveness under adverse conditions demonstrated American training programs that produced consistent defensive capabilities across all bomber crew positions. The American defensive gunnery that had forced German fighters to limit their engagement sequences throughout the extended combat represented systematic training and equipment advantages that German bomber crews had never achieved despite comparable individual capabilities and theoretical knowledge of defensive tactics and procedures. Captain Robert Martinez, Hell's Angels co-pilot, managed engine operations during the return flight using controls that continued responding adequately despite battle damage that had affected primary engine management systems and instrumentation. His expertise in American bomber power plant operation enabled continued flight operations using backup systems and manual procedures that maintained adequate performance for successful mission completion. The American bomber's Wright R-1820 Cyclone engines demonstrated operational reliability under battle damage conditions that German power plants had never matched during comparable combat encounters. The engines incorporated design margins and manufacturing quality that allowed continued operation despite damage that would have caused German engines to fail catastrophically during flight operations. Major Adolf Galland Jr., leading his squadron away from the engagement area with depleted ammunition supplies, transmitted tactical assessment that confirmed the systematic failure of German interceptor capabilities against American bomber formations equipped with improved survivability. Features: American bomber survivability has evolved beyond our weapons' effectiveness and tactical methods. Individual aircraft are absorbing concentrated firepower that previously sufficed for destroying entire formations while maintaining mission capability that ensures successful target engagement. Galland's professional evaluation, informed by extensive combat experience and tactical expertise, validated observations that German fighter aviation faced opponents whose capabilities exceeded German defensive planning assumptions by margins that threatened the fundamental viability of continued air defense operations. The intelligence implications of Hell's Angels' survival would reshape German understanding of American industrial capabilities and bomber development priorities that had achieved systematic advantages across all aspects of aircraft construction, crew training, and operational procedures. German aviation leadership would be forced to acknowledge that American bomber operations represented integrated industrial development that German capabilities could not match or counter effectively. Oberst Walter Ossol, commanding JG-1 Shand, observing the tactical situation during the bomber withdrawal, provided strategic assessment that German air defense leadership could no longer ignore. American bomber formations are achieving successful strategic bombing operations despite maximum defensive effort by our most experienced fighter units. Their aircraft survivability, crew training, and equipment reliability create advantages that neutralize our interceptor effectiveness regardless of tactical innovation or resource concentration. WWII's comprehensive evaluation confirmed that German fighter aviation faced systematic disadvantages that extended beyond individual aircraft performance to encompass fundamental differences in American versus German approaches to bomber construction, crew development, and operational integration. The strategic bombing damage inflicted on Berlin targets despite concentrated German defensive efforts would validate American bomber doctrine while demonstrating industrial capabilities that German military production could not match during sustained wartime operations. American bombers had achieved mission success rates that made strategic bombing economically viable despite German interceptor opposition. Weber calculated the tactical mathematics that would determine future aerial warfare over Europe as American bomber capabilities continued improving, while German fighter effectiveness was systematically degraded by ammunition shortages, pilot casualties, and aircraft losses that German production capacity could not replace at rates sufficient for maintaining defensive adequacy. German fighter units would face increasingly capable American bomber formations equipped with improved survivability features, while German ammunition supplies, pilot replacement rates, and aircraft production struggled to maintain current operational levels under resource constraints and strategic bombing pressure on German industrial capacity. The compound effects of American advantages in aircraft construction, crew training, equipment reliability, and industrial production created systematic superiority that German aviation could not overcome using existing capabilities or realistic Improvements in German development programs constrained by wartime resource limitations and strategic bombing disruption. General Major Joseph Kammhuber, commanding night fighter operations and monitoring daylight interception effectiveness, reached conclusions that German air defense strategy required fundamental revision. American bomber survivability represents systematic engineering improvements that our current interceptor capabilities cannot overcome. We face opponents whose industrial development has achieved decisive advantages that threaten the viability of continued defensive operations using existing methods and resources. Kammhuber's strategic assessment confirmed that German air defense faced technological and industrial disadvantages that would prove insurmountable given current German capabilities and resource constraints imposed by American strategic bombing campaigns against German aviation production facilities. The final assessment that Weber would present to Luftwaffe intelligence represented more than tactical observation. It constituted acknowledgement that German fighter aviation had been systematically defeated by American opponents whose capabilities exceeded every assumption German air defense planning had incorporated. The survival of Hell's Angels, after absorbing over 200 direct hits from concentrated German firepower, demonstrated American industrial maturity that German engineering had never achieved despite theoretical knowledge and scientific expertise. General Oberst Hans-Jürgen Stumpf, commanding Luftwaffe Reich and responsible for home defense operations, received combat reports that confirmed systematic failure of German interception capabilities against American bomber formations equipped with survivability features that neutralized conventional fighter attack methods. Stumpf's operational authority encompassed air defense of German industrial capacity, making his strategic assessment decisive for future resource allocation and defensive planning priorities. American bomber construction has achieved survivability, levels that render our current interceptor doctrine obsolete, Stumpf reported to Oberkommando der Luftwaffe. Individual bombers are demonstrating damage tolerance that exceeds our weapons' effectiveness, while maintaining operational capability that ensures successful mission completion. German air defense faces technological disadvantages that cannot be overcome using existing aircraft, tactics, or weapon systems. Stumpf's strategic evaluation represented definitive acknowledgement that German aviation faced opponents whose industrial development had achieved decisive superiority across all aspects of bomber operations that German capabilities could not match or counter effectively during sustained wartime operations. The crew of Hell's Angels completed their return flight to England with mission success that validated American strategic bombing doctrine while demonstrating aircraft survivability and crew effectiveness that German bomber aviation had never achieved despite comparable resources and theoretical capabilities. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Rosenthal brought his damaged B-17 routine home with precision that reflected systematic training and equipment reliability exceeding German operational standards. Technical Sergeant Frank Rodriguez, the B-17's engineer, managed aircraft systems throughout the return flight using procedures that enabled continued operation despite battle damage that would have forced German crews to abandon their aircraft or attempt emergency landings in hostile territory. His expertise in American bomber maintenance and emergency management preserved mission success and crew survival under conditions that exceeded German training scenarios. The American bombers' successful mission completion, despite absorbing unprecedented battle damage, represented proof that American industrial engineering had achieved capabilities that German aviation could not duplicate using existing manufacturing methods, design philosophy, or resource allocation priorities constrained by wartime limitations and strategic bombing pressure. Major Heinz Baer, leading his depleted squadron back to base with empty ammunition supplies and demoralized pilots, transmitted final assessment that captured the strategic implications of German tactical failure. American bomber survivability has eliminated our interceptor effectiveness regardless of pilot skill or tactical innovation. Individual bombers are absorbing concentrated firepower that previously destroyed entire formations while continuing missions that achieve strategic objectives despite maximum defensive effort. Weber's professional evaluation, based on extensive combat experience and tactical authority within German fighter aviation, confirmed that German air defense had been systematically defeated by opponents whose capabilities exceeded German defensive planning assumptions by margins that threatened the fundamental viability of continued resistance against American strategic bombing campaigns. The statistical analysis that Weber compiled revealed American advantages that extended beyond individual aircraft capabilities to encompass systematic manufacturing quality, crew training programs, equipment reliability standards, and operational procedures that maximized mission success probability under adverse combat conditions that German aviation had never addressed comprehensively. German fighter units had expended ammunition supplies sufficient for destroying multiple bomber formations against a single American aircraft that completed its mission with bombing accuracy that contributed to systematic degradation of German war production capacity. The resource expenditure ratios that American bomber survivability demanded exceeded German logistical capacity for sustained defensive operations. The industrial comparison was equally devastating for German strategic planning. American aircraft construction incorporated damage tolerance, system redundancy, and manufacturing quality that enabled continued operation under battle conditions that would have destroyed German aircraft designs built using precision manufacturing techniques that prioritized theoretical performance over practical survivability considerations. Oberst Dietrich Rabach, compiling tactical reports from subordinate squadrons, documented German fighter effectiveness degradation that confirmed systematic American superiority across all aspects of bomber operations. American bomber formations are achieving strategic bombing success despite concentrated defensive efforts by our most experienced fighter units flying advanced aircraft with proven combat effectiveness. Their integrated approach to aircraft design, crew training, and operational procedures creates advantages we cannot counter using existing capabilities. Rabach's comprehensive assessment validated observations that German aviation faced opponents whose industrial development represented systematic advancement beyond German technological capabilities or realistic improvement programs constrained by resource limitations and strategic bombing disruption of German aviation production facilities. The strategic bombing success achieved by American formations, despite maximum German defensive effort, represented decisive validation of American bomber doctrine and industrial capabilities that would reshape aerial warfare over Europe for the remainder of the conflict. German air defense effectiveness had been systematically neutralized by American technological and training advantages. The psychological impact on German fighter pilots who had witnessed Hell's Angels survive unprecedented punishment would influence tactical decisions and operational effectiveness throughout remaining defensive operations. German pilots who had expected rapid bomber destruction through proven methods found themselves facing opponents whose capabilities exceeded every tactical assumption their training had incorporated. For Weber, returning to base with ammunition exhausted and tactical doctrine proven inadequate, the encounter represented definitive proof that American aviation had achieved systematic superiority that German fighter aviation could not counter using existing aircraft, weapons, or tactical methods. The single B-17 that had absorbed over 200 direct hits while completing its mission successfully demonstrated American industrial maturity that exceeded German capabilities by decisive margins. The intelligence report that Weber would compile contained conclusions that German aviation leadership could no longer avoid confronting. American bomber operations represented integrated industrial development that exceeded German defensive capabilities across all operational categories, creating compound advantages that neutralized German interceptor effectiveness regardless of pilot skill, aircraft performance, or tactical innovation. The horror that German fighter pilot Klaus Weber had witnessed on March 6, 1944, foretold the systematic defeat of German air defense by American bomber formations whose survivability exceeded every assumption German tactical doctrine had incorporated. The 200 direct hits that Hell's Angels had absorbed while completing its mission successfully represented proof that American aviation had achieved decisive superiority, that German military capabilities could not effectively counter using existing resources and methods, ensuring continued strategic bombing success that would accelerate German industrial collapse and military defeat.